Welcome back. I'm Shane and this is Relative Time. And today I'm going to share a little bit of good news, bad news, and finally some more good news with all of you. The good news is that Phoibos now has some of the Proteus watches in stock. Now the Proteus came out about 3 months ago and had a bit of an unusual design, but turned out to be rather popular, as all of the non-meteorite versions sold out pretty quickly, and even now those meteorite versions are gone. However, the bad news is that these aren't the versions we saw before, but a new version that is sort of the horological equivalent of pre-distressed jeans, and that's all thanks to this new aged steel case. But the final good news is that these new versions are pretty cool, and I think this aged steel case actually enhances the design a bit. And personally, I like this blue aged steel version they sent better than the white version I had before. And it's this aged steel version that we're going to go over today. Now, for the sake of transparency, and just like all the other Phoibos reviews, this watch was given to the channel and they're not asking for it back. And since it was only a few months since I last reviewed the Proteus, and because the changes are more cosmetic, this isn't going to be a full detailed review. But rather I'm going to focus on the changes made to this new version and how it affects the overall feel and flow of the watch. So if you missed that original review or feel like you need a refresher after this, there will be a link at the end. But for now, let's just jump right in and start by quickly taking a look at the specs. And those specs are almost identical to the stainless version. It's 42mm wide with a 49mm lug-to-lug, and just over 14mm tall. The only real difference here is the weight, as this one doesn't come with a bracelet. With the leather strap, you're looking at 115 grams. So it is a little tall, but otherwise a pretty standard size. Yet just due to the case shape where the lugs curve down, and they curve down right at the natural curvature of my 7-inch wrist, I actually found the Proteus to be the most comfortable Phoibos I've ever worn. So with the aged steel version, you have the same specs and the same great feel on the wrist, as well as the same great bezel action. It's still a little bit hard to get a grip on, but once you do, it's one of the best actions I've run across, with just a nice sharp click as you turn it. Now, the biggest difference with the aged steel version is this pre-distressed case, which gives it an almost gunmetal gray coloring, as well as a bit of an older vintage feel. It's definitely interesting, but I don't think everyone's gonna love this. Some people just prefer a classic stainless finish. But personally, I think it's rather cool, and a cool alternative to say a DLC-coated case or a bronze case when you want something different. And in this particular instance, I think it works rather well. With this angular case shape, that finish seems to accentuate the angles and edges even more than the stainless version. And when taking a closer look, you'll see that this aged steel finish is on every aspect of the case. And that includes the inside of the lugs, the edges of the bezel, and the buckle on the strap. The difference in the finish is especially apparent when you take a look at the case back. And this is something I think looks really cool. And when combined with that Phoibos logo, it really lends to that aged maritime theming. It kind of looks like something you might actually take out of an old weather-beaten ship, or at the very least something you find at the Pirates of the Caribbean gift shop. Now, one of my issues from before with the Proteus is that I liked every single element individually, but I started to question if they belonged or worked together nicely. And one of the biggest aspects of this was the unusual twisted knurling on the crown. It kind of seemed out of place on the stainless version. Now here, it is still a little unusual, but as a whole it blends into the case and the design a whole lot better with that distressed treatment. So for me, this is a definite improvement. Now unfortunately there are only 4 colorways of this aged steel version, and only 2 of them are what I'd refer to as a normal dial, which is a black and this blue version. And I think for the most part they're pretty similar to the black and blue versions of the stainless Proteus. The biggest exception to that is the use of old radium lume instead of C3 for the indices and the hands, which, contrary to the name, has nothing to do with radium. That's just the name of that particular color, which gives it an aged or off yellow coloring rather than white, which again just adds to that vintage nautical vibe. as well as adds a ton of contrast while looking rather striking against the blue textured dial. This also extends to the lume on the bezel, which is also old radium. And combined with the indices, it all looks fantastic next to that treated steel. So moving to old radium is a fantastic change, but it is one that comes with a trade-off, and I'll get to that shortly. The only other difference I noticed is with the chapter ring. On the stainless steel version, it had this off yellow look, and at least on the white version I had, it just looked really weird. So they seem to have changed it to the silver or white version. I think it looks a lot better and looks really striking on this blue dial, as well as acting as a nice frame, separating out the main area of the dial from the bezel. Now overall, I really like the changes to the dial, but there is one thing that's still the same that I still don't like, and that's the framing around the date. It still looks odd here, but maybe in a different way. And of course it would have looked a lot better with a blue date wheel, which for a lot of you I think goes without saying. But let's get back to that trade-off I mentioned with the lume. Recently I learned that old radium lume doesn't quite have the same staying power as say C3 or the blue BGW9 lume, and I think this was rather apparent when I reviewed the Phoibos Leviathan. It looks great initially, but it doesn't necessarily have the longevity. And you can see that for yourself here, as both the Leviathan and the Aged Steep Proteus don't last quite as long as the others. So just like the Leviathan, it is a little bit disappointing, but that's kind of the trade-off here for giving it a cooler look during the daylight. So as a whole, it's still good lume, but it's not your typical Phoibos lume monster. Now, unlike the stainless version, this aged steel one doesn't come with a bracelet. My guess is that there were either technical challenges to making an aged steel one, or they just figured people didn't want it. So instead they included an Italian leather strap. Now it is only genuine leather, but overall it's a good strap. It's really comfortable and instantly conforms to your wrist, so no real break-in period with this one. Phoibos also included a rubber strap, but that one doesn't come with its own buckle, so you'll have to swap it over if you want to use that one. I think it would have been nice if this was fitted to the case, but otherwise it's a pretty good strap, if not a bit generic. Now price is the exact same as the stainless version. It's listed at $299, but $269 after a 10% off discount code. Plus a little bit more for the Black Forged Carbon and a bit more for the Meteorite version. And since you're not getting a bracelet with this version, you aren't getting quite the same value. So just something to consider if you really want a Proteus and you're trying to decide between this aged steel one or waiting for the eventual return of the stainless. In my original review, I mentioned that the Proteus isn't a classically styled diver. And if that's what you're looking for, this isn't going to be it. But rather the Proteus is something fun and something a little funky. It was one of the most interesting and perhaps coolest offerings from Phoibos this year. So I think this aged steel version takes all of that and then kicks it up another notch. It's hard to go wrong with classic stainless steel, but I do like this aged steel look, and especially as an alternative to say like a DLC or a bronze case. So I'd be kind of curious to see what an Eagle Ray or a Wave Master from Phoibos would look like with this aged steel treatment. And if these do well, we just might see that in the future. But in the meantime, let me know what you think about the Aged Steep Proteus down below, or if you can think of another watch with a similar treatment. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for joining me.